DevOps for Desktop Applications with Daniel Jacobson.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your humble host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and show notes. And we have a few announcements right before we get into the show. I will be at Microsoft Ignite, and I'll be hosting a social developer party the night before the keynote, Sunday night, and it's called Party with Palermo. I started this at TechEd 2006 and done it every year at least one conference, and it's grown ever since. And if you're a developer, go to eventbrite.com and just search for Party with Palermo, and you'll find it. We do still have some spots, although we have I think we're filling up really quickly. So reserve your tickets now. I'm also, for Ignite, one of the conference's official community reporters. So if you're a speaker, send me an email. I'd love to record a pre-conference interview to get people excited about your talk, and then afterwards to encourage people to watch the recording. And if you're at the conference and see me with a bunch of camera gear, just stop me and let's have a chat. We can record a little something. And something else to look out for, which kind of coincides with the conference, November 2nd, my latest book, .NET DevOps for Azure, will be out in print from A Press. And you can get that from Amazon or A Press, and it'll be at the Microsoft Ignite bookstore also. You can get the ebook right now going to bit.ly/.NET DevOps ebook. You have to spell out DOTNET, .NET DevOps ebook. And there's also a special offer for any user group leader or conference leader or anyone speaking at those community events. For those in-person events, I'd love to send 2 print copies of the book for you to give away to any of the attendees. And so to request those, go to bit.ly/.NET DevOps book for community, and be happy to get 2 print books over to you. And also a special pre-release offer, which expires November 2nd with the official release of the book. If you email me, jeffrey@cleared-measure.com, and tell me who my very first guest on the Azure DevOps podcast was, then I'll send you a free ebook copy. But you got to email me, and you have to know who the first guest was, so you longtime listeners have a leg up. And last announcement, if you followed me over the last 20 years, you know that I love to teach, and I'll be teaching another training course, my .NET DevOps Bootcamp on October 28th. .NET DevOps Bootcamp is aimed at lead developers, team architects who want to ship quickly and operate better. So check out me on Twitter for information on that at Jeffrey Palermo. That's JEFFREYPALERMO. And now on to the show. Daniel Jacobson is with me today, and he's a program management lead on the Visual Studio team focused on empowering Windows developers. You can find him on Twitter at PMATMIC. Just think short for Program Manager at Microsoft, PMATMIC. And he's with me here today, and he was one of the speakers at the .NET Conf 2019. Daniel, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for hosting me. I'll also be at Ignite, so maybe I can snag a couple of those books from you for my DevOps talk.
Fantastic. Absolutely. And you know, for some of the listeners probably they saw you at the .NET Conf. You can view all the recordings online, which is amazing. But for those who might not be so familiar with you, what's your journey been? How did you land in this spot where you are focusing on desktop and client applications and empowering Windows developers?
Great question. So I joined Microsoft about 5 years ago. And when I joined, it was when we were ramping up and preparing to ship our initial Universal Windows Platform release for both developers and the platform itself with Windows 10. And we've learned a lot along the way. And basically, ever since I've been at Microsoft, my role has been focused on that Windows developer audience from end to end. And so over time, I've learned more and more about the end-to-end developer workflow. especially with some of the challenges associated with building and distributing applications on Windows and how that impacts DevOps. And so really, as a PM on the team, I'm looking for what is the biggest challenges that developers face anywhere in their development. And DevOps is definitely one of the ones that we notice more and more is neglected from that desktop developer audience. So,
yeah. Well, I think there's a massive number of people out there that have tremendous experience building web applications, but they might not have put a significant client or native application of any kind into production. And we certainly look at statistics from Stack Overflow, and that over 50% of the people developing in the industry have fewer than 5 years experience. And in the last 5 years, an explosion of web applications, really over the last 15 years, I guess. So would you level set what the heck a client application is? How are these different? What makes it different?
Yeah, so the tools that we mostly work on are for native client application developers. So they're building an application native to the platform for Windows. And the thing that makes them most different is it's not running in a browser. I mean, it's running on the actual machine. And a lot of what we hear from customers in terms of why they're focusing and prioritizing and building these native Windows applications is for a variety of reasons. Some of what we hear is offline capabilities. They don't want to be tied to networking. Some of it is they want low latency, or they have really extreme latency requirements for their applications, more industrial settings, if you will. Think like manufacturing or medical fields, things like that. And so basically from a end user or from a developer's perspective, one of the biggest differences between browser applications and native applications is how they get delivered to your customers. In a browser application, usually a lot of the code is running server side. You may have some client side JavaScript, but basically whenever your end user refreshes the website, they get the latest version of it that you have complete control over. And because a native application is running physically on the machine, you as a developer have to think about, okay, how do you physically get those bits onto that machine to be able to run? And how do you manage updates? And how do you control which versions your end users are using? And so a lot of the things kind of carry over from web to client, but I think there's a different set of challenges, especially in the DevOps space, that kind of comes with that. And so there's still pretty much every Fortune 500 company out there has some set of .NET desktop applications that are powering their businesses, whether it's HR software, project management software, interacting with devices. The other one we hear, I'm not sure I mentioned that, but peripherals is another big reason for native applications. If you think one of the huge value propositions of Windows as a platform is third-party driver support.
Right.
And so you have all of these device manufacturers that build devices for Windows with their own client SDKs that then Windows developers can interact with. And so there's tons and tons of applications out there that really just power manufacturing, industry, everything from native applications.
Yeah, shipping docks, they need those handheld barcode scanners that just one click and then application, shipment received.
Yep. And the lines are blurring every year. I mean, obviously, as web standards progress, there's more and more power in the JavaScript client and what you can do. So yes, now you can interact with a camera through a browser. You could create such as like a barcode scanner like scenario.
The common ones.
But especially for more niche kind of industry specific devices, standards may never catch up because standards are kind of centered around the lowest common denominator, the most breadth scenarios. Whereas with Windows, you just have so much power. You can do so many custom things.
Yeah, I think that's been neglected for some time. Whereas if you go back into the 90s, Visual Basic was all about desktop, and it was hugely popular. And then when .NET 1.0 came out, there was active server pages, which helped with the explosion of the web. So there was WebForms 1.0, but then there was also WinForms was hugely popular.
It still is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still hugely popular, yeah.
So every company that had custom software in that era has those today, but some people who are maybe startup company or whatnot, they might have just some back-end services and then web front end, and they're learning what the heck it means to do a client application for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So before we get into, there's a lot of things going on with App Center to help with, but what does the landscape look at today? What should our listeners be evaluating? What are their choices on the Microsoft platform when they're thinking about running a native Windows application?
That's a great question. And if you kind of follow back the past couple of years and look at historical trends for what we've been doing as a company, basically, we've been trying to make it so that any application developer on Windows, building applications for Windows, has a great experience, regardless of which platform you choose. And so a lot of the technology we've been working on is decoupling some of the platform capabilities from Windows 10, from the Universal Windows platform specifically, to be a library or to be enabled for any Windows application developer. And so we started this kind of going back a couple of years with what was called the Desktop Bridge, or Centennial was the project name, which enabled developers to use the modern packaging technology to be able to package existing Windows applications and just bring them to the Microsoft Store. And from a distribution standpoint, or if you're thinking about kind of the ops side of software development, that automated a lot of the challenges that desktop application developers do have with deploying software. The store, for example, provides services for automatic updates. They do background updates. They can only essentially update the bits that change, so you're not downloading the entire application every time, and they just manage a lot of that for you. Then we took it forward and we actually decoupled some of that technology from just the store, and so now we have a technology called MSIX plus App Installer, and you can essentially build your own custom deployment solutions while still relying on some of that awesome technology that we built for the store first. And then you kind of take a step further. Recently, we announced, I think it was last build, if I remember correctly, so about a year and a half ago, a technology called XAML Islands. And what this enables you to do is for any Win32 application, whether it's native or .NET, and when I say native, I mean C++ in this context, I should be more clear. You can go ahead and host more modern XAML UI into your existing applications. And then kind of going forwards, we announced more recently at this past build a technology called WinUI, which is essentially an evolution of our modern XAML platform to be decoupled from any specific developer platform and consumable from any application developer on Windows. And so going forwards, you'll see more and more. You can actually view their roadmap, and this is open source, at aka.ms/WinUI. And some of the MSIX technology is also open source. So basically, if I had to summarize my long ramble just now into two major things, I would say we've been trying to make it so any technology we build is usable by any Windows application developer. And we've been trying to do as much of it as we can in the open with the community for the community.
That's really awesome. So MSF applications.
MSIX.
Okay.
Oh, you mean MFC?
Sorry, MFC. You're right.
Yes, MFC. Yes.
C++, existing C++ desktop applications can embed .NET logic using XAML Islands.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yes.
That is pretty cool.
Yep. And then the other thing that we made it really easy to do, you could do this in the past, but there's a lot of platform APIs specific to Windows 10 and Windows 10 devices. We have like a modern Bluetooth stack. You think camera APIs, location APIs, asking about privacy settings, things like that. We're now shipping those as NuGet packages. So it's really easy to actually augment your existing applications with the latest and greatest APIs built for Windows. So, and
awesome.
Again, that's any application. So
yeah. So with WinForms and WPF and .NET Core 3 coming out, what things can we not yet do if we're trying to go to .NET Core 3? What do we need to watch out for?
Yeah, so there's only a couple of things that are not going to be supported in .NET Core, and a lot of that is for patterns and practices reasons. We've learned a lot over the decade plus that .NET has been around, and we want to make it the most performant, robust, secure platform. So the few things that existing desktop applications will not be able to use is WCF server implementation in their client, but WCF client still works. .NET remoting no longer works, and multiple app domains no longer works, but you can still operate under the context of a single app domain. But we are also working on guidance and documentation for migrating those types of scenarios over. For example, a good WCF replacement is gRPC. That's what we've been recommending as kind of the standard going forwards with .NET Core. And so from a lot of working with real customers on their existing applications, we haven't noticed huge migration blockers. Some of the other things that will be different, but still enabled, is the project file format. And so if you do a lot of custom builds stuff in your project file, you may have to rethink how you do some of your builds. And then the last one, and probably one of the more challenging ones for desktop developers, is we don't yet have a mechanism in place for system-wide runtime servicing support. So in the past, if you had .NET Framework installed on Windows, there was a security update. Windows would update, and it would update the version of .NET Framework on the machine.
Right.
With .NET Core, currently, for desktop developers, the story is to ship the runtime with your application, and you can do that either using MSIX packaging, where we package up the runtime as a part of your app, or by essentially compiling a single executable that contains all of the runtime dependencies. And then when there's a .NET Core update that you want to take advantage of, you can ship that whenever you want, but you're kind of in charge of servicing with your app. But this is something that we are actually working towards, and we would love to get developer input. So if you have thoughts or opinions on how you would like to see runtime servicing supported in the future, go ahead and tweet at me at PM@MIC.
Awesome. Now, this is hugely popular, especially for web applications and backend services and SQL databases. Azure Pipelines is part of the Azure DevOps family, but App Center has been there for a while, but it doesn't get talked about nearly as much as Azure DevOps. And so what do we need to know about App Center and what the heck it is and what place it occupies?
Yeah. So App Center, you can kind of think of as your one-stop shop for services related to client applications. And so right now, there's not yet build and test support for Windows apps in App Center, which is why my demos have been relying on Azure DevOps. But I think those are on their roadmap coming forwards. But basically, it's the most simple way for a client application, in this case, mobile or desktop developer, to get all of the services they need, meaning DevOps build, deploy, testing, analytics, telemetry, as well as the services that are most common to those scenarios, such as storage or notifications or identity or those types of things. And so really, Azure is a huge platform, and there's so much power and capability of Azure as a cloud. But if you're just building a desktop app or you're just building a mobile app, you may kind of get lost in the complexity and the power of what Azure can offer. And so that's kind of where App Center comes into play. It solves a lot of those specific needs for client developers. Okay. And then it offers some value beyond Azure too. If you think about like the deployment services or the beta testing services and things like that Azure doesn't really provide as an off-the-shelf service.
Gotcha.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
Let's walk it through, because I think this can be a little bit confusing at times. So if someone is, let's just say upgrading in a little older WinForms app, not terribly complicated, so they're going to upgrade it into .NET Core. Mm-hmm. They're tracking their work somewhere. And so does App Center change using Azure Boards, or do we still track our work on Azure Boards?
You can still use your existing work item tracking software. Okay. App Center does have some features to integrate with some of the popular ones, such as GitHub, Azure DevOps, and I believe Jira, to automatically create bugs. So because there's crash reporting in App Center, if it notices a certain threshold of crashes that you as the developer can set, it'll actually automatically file and link to a bug to essentially make it really easy for you to map crash reports and stack traces to a bug that you are now tracking in your own work item tracking database.
Okay. So if I have nothing, App Center doesn't provide work item tracking. Is that right?
No, it does not provide end-to-end work item
tracking. All right, so I got to have something for that. All right, so then source control.
Correct. It integrates with existing source control, so it does not provide source control.
All right, so now I've got source control, and now I need an automated build process. Does that App Center do builds as well?
App Center does builds for most of the platforms they support. Since WPF and WinForms were recently released under preview, those features are not yet supported. But it uses Azure DevOps under the hood. And so one of the advantages is there's kind of like this you set up a simple build in App Center, and then you realize you want to do something more complex or more powerful. App Center is the easiest, quickest way to get started, but then you have the opportunity to kind of grow up into a more complex or more advanced deployment solution where you might have multiple deployment endpoints, you might have multiple channels, you might have kind of pre-release staging environment where you run a different set of tests. And then before that, you can kind of gate whether you go to production or not. So those types of things.
Okay, so you're saying that for builds, right now I still have builds in Azure pipelines, but in the future, App Center is working on supporting builds.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So build happens. Now I've got a numbered release candidate package of some sort. And what for WinForms? Are we doing in nupcake files in Azure Artifacts, or are we doing MSIX, a new format? What's the release candidate package?
The developer has the choice. So you can compile it as a self-contained executable.
Yep.
You could compile it as a framework-dependent application that essentially has a JSON file that specifies the runtime dependencies, and then you could put that in an MSI or a zip, or you can use MSIX packaging. We have tooling in Visual Studio that'll make it so that your build will automatically produce a fully self-contained MSIX package. But it's really up to the developer to figure out what features they need and where do they need their application to deploy to. MSIX does have a limited set of support on Windows 7, but it requires an installer before you install the app itself to enable that file extension handler. So yeah, I mean, really anything. It's deploy your application how you want to. And then one step that we are actually flighting right now that should be released, maybe by the time this podcast gets released, is a Azure DevOps build artifact, so an Azure Pipelines artifact for distributing directly to App Center. So basically, you can set it up so that when you check in your code to whatever source control system you use, whether it's GitHub, whether it's Azure DevOps.
On this podcast, it's Azure
It's always Azure DevOps, yep. So if you use Azure DevOps for your source control, you can set it up so you commit and sync to your repo. It'll kick off a build, then it'll automatically publish to App Center, and then it can send an automated notification to your beta testers, the users of your application that can then download it directly through App Center.
Okay. The longtime listeners know that I don't ever like to leave it as it depends or it's your choice. So we're driving to some prescriptive guidance, but it sounds like the choice is you get the MSIX, which is a file extension. You could do a framework dependent app and package it up as a zip or a nupcake file. Are those really okay? Or a standalone exe. So it sounds like those are really the options.
Yeah, what we're kind of marching towards is we want to make MSIX a great solution. That's the one we're actively investing in a lot right now.
Okay.
But we're doing a lot of research currently in this specific topic. As it relates to runtime dependency, deployment is very kind of tied to that. And if you think about the end-to-end deployment solution for desktop developers and how it relates to what sort of runtime dependencies they rely on, it kind of forces some assumptions. And so again, this is like the number one thing, or one of the things that we are all in on looking for and researching and talking to real developers on how they solve this today for desktop apps, because we want to make it as seamless as possible while providing some of the power that the web does. I mean, really, it should be when your end users relaunch your application, they should always have the latest version. Yeah. I mean, if you think of some really great desktop applications today, they solve this. If you think of like Visual Studio Code as a great example, every time you open Visual Studio Code, it's always got the latest version. So
so in the frame, we got this WinForms application. We're driving towards MSIX as the going forward package format. Just to clarify, is that ready today?
MSIX is ready today.
Perfect. Okay.
It supports some of the features are only supported on more recent versions of Windows 10. So if you have a Windows 7 dependency, you might want to make a different choice.
Gotcha. All right. So now we have our package, and now we need to deploy to our first pre-production environment or test group of users. What does that look like, and what tool do I use?
So today, what that looks like is you essentially download the artifact from Azure DevOps and then upload it to App Center for a release group. And so you can create multiple releases that go to different audiences in App Center.
Is you as a person or you as your PowerShell script does it?
You as a person today, but this is where that Azure DevOps build task is coming. So currently flighting in preview already is a task to automate that. And so basically when your Azure DevOps build is done, it'll automatically publish to Azure or to Visual Studio App Center.
Okay, so we've got to wait a little bit before we have that connection.
Yes, that should be within the next couple weeks. So
that's great.
By the time this is published, that may already be supported.
Gotcha. Okay, because I guess we have a dead end without that at the moment. Is that right?
It's one manual step.
Step, yeah. Okay. So we got to get it over to App Center. It will be connected in a number of weeks. And now we're over in App Center instead of in Azure Pipelines.
Correct.
Okay, so if that package, that MSIX gets over to App Center, what does it do? is it, what is that? What does the chain of pre-production environments look like?
Sure. So from a pre-production environment standpoint, what App Center enables you to do is specify a set of collaborators. And those can be groups of people, those can be individuals, however you want. And then you can set up an individual release in App Center.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when you publish a build to that release, it sends a notification to all of the users that are essentially assigned to that release, the people that you specify, to go download it. And so then they have the choice to go download it hosted from App Center and get the latest version on their machine.
Okay. And when they get the latest version, is that going through the Microsoft Store, or ClickOnce was a thing at some point?
Correct. No, so this is you're reading my mind as to the next steps. So
okay.
Yeah, so today again, this is a manual step today. One of the features that MSIX as a platform supports is this feature called App Installer. And so basically it's related to the same store services running on any Windows 10 machine, but it's constantly checking for updates based off of where the application was installed. And you as the developer could configure this to check every time the app is launched on some certain cadence, like once a day, once an hour, things like that. And so one of the other features that App Center is working on is supporting automatic updates using the app installer format. And so today, again, this is the second of two manual steps today. Once it's all configured, the users of your group that are tied to that pre-production release environment have to manually download the app. In the future, once this automatic updates feature is supported in App Center, basically they only have to ever install the application once. And then every time a new build is published, it'll update automatically behind the scenes based off of what the developer configures.
Okay, so it sounds like this is a full-on replacement for what people are still relying on ClickOnce for.
Yes, so App Installer is effectively a full-on replacement for what people are relying on ClickOnce for. And on more recent versions of Windows, all of the powerful features you may need are pretty much there today. You can essentially block running the application pending installs. I think there's support for rolling back, but I'm not sure yet, actually, so don't quote me on that one.
Okay.
But again, this is another technology that's open source. And so
Sure.
If you have feedback or if you have issues, look for some of the MSIX packaging repositories on GitHub. And that's where we ultimately want to add value.
No, I think that's amazing because people I talk to tons of teens all the time, and for the Windows applications that are heavily distributed, the story today is still ClickOnce.
Still ClickOnce. Yep.
Today. So it's good to know that this is the intended replacement for ClickOnce.
Yes. And
That's
we're actually
amazing.
looking at ways to solve more and more of these problems. Basically, we know ClickOnce is a huge dependency for desktop developers, and we know that there are a lot of some issues with it. I wouldn't say a lot, but we've heard some feedback from customers, and we want to have a much more modern, robust replacement for this. From like the Azure DevOps perspective, we want to make it so that you as a developer can publish a build, or sorry, not even that, but commit a change and sync to your repository. And then a couple minutes later, your users are getting that update without any additional interaction.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, this is through the MSIX packages and then the new App Center. Is it a name? Because ClickOnce has a name. It's ClickOnce. Is there a name for this new update process?
So App Installer is the name. So App Installer is a slightly overloaded term, but this is what I'm referring to, some of more of those advanced features. So there's a file format called the app.app installer. And basically, that's where you specify your deployment options and your deployment metadata, including where is this file being installed from, so that the client knows where to ping the server for updates. It also includes the options for if you want to block launching the app pending updates. You can specify how frequently to check for updates. And then there's a client-side application built into Windows called App Installer, which is essentially the MSIX file extension handler for Windows, where you can double-click on a package and start installing it.
Gotcha.
And then it also has this hook into like the background store services that are essentially managing those update queries. So it's constantly checking both the store as well as all of the custom hosted locations for updates. And one other benefit of this is, as a developer, you don't have to configure any long-running update service for your application. Basically, that's built into Windows. And the other advantage is, say you have 30 of these applications on your machine. If each one of them built their own custom service for checking for updates, all of a sudden you're having CPU throttling issues, you're having potentially battery life and performance issues. But since it's all a singular service, it's really optimized.
Gotcha. Okay. And so it sounds like some of the Microsoft Store infrastructure is being used to do that. Is the Microsoft Business Store a thing?
Yeah, so there is a Microsoft Store for Business product, which effectively hooks into the same exact Microsoft Store UI, but as an enterprise, you can configure your own custom storefront, where it would be an additional tab in the store where you could host your own custom software for your organization.
And does App Center have a integration with that, or is that separate right now?
So App Center does not yet have an integration into the store, but Azure DevOps does. So there's an artifact in Azure DevOps for building to publish directly to the store. And there's also a set of store APIs to do direct publishing. So you could essentially script that in Azure DevOps if you needed to. Okay.
So for testing, for pre-production, we have a number of known users that have access to this non-released version of our WinForms application that we're working with. And then they have the production one on their box. They're using production, but then they've installed this next release to just try it out. And so what does the process look like to actually, quote, go to production?
It depends on your scenario, the consumers of your application, things like that. The store is a great option. Basically, the store solves a lot of the challenges for you, so you don't have to roll your own system. We also had a demo done at, I think it was last build as well, this past build, where we did a more comprehensive end-to-end Azure DevOps pipeline that published to multiple different endpoints. The store was one option. Another option is just some kind of simple Azure website. And so one of the other things that our Visual Studio tooling does is when you create an MSIX package, it creates essentially like an index.html page that does some of the basic functionality for creating your own web-hosted installer.
So URL launched installer or URL launched application?
URL launched installer. So basically you go to the web page and there's a button to install the app.
Gotcha.
And then that single button actually hooks into like a URL protocol handler for Windows that launches that app installer app directly. And so you get the UI to install the application. You see the publisher info. You can see some of the cert info. You can see the package icons, things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And App Center has long touted the Xamarin operational telemetry and crash reports and all that, which is in there. I'm guessing that's wired in.
All of that, to me, this is like the coolest part of App Center because this stuff is free. It takes 5 minutes to set up, and it's something that, especially the desktop audience, I feel like doesn't really grasp how powerful and how easy it is to integrate into their applications. Like you don't even need to do anything else with App Center. You don't need to distribute with App Center. You don't need to use any of their other services, but just getting the telemetry and the crash reporting is so powerful and so fast.
Okay, so really all of your logs from your application could be streamed back to a central location all the time. Is that right?
Correct. And no matter where you're deploying it from, it doesn't need to be deployed from App Center to get the same crash reporting and telemetry. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's even great to just have the capability even to measure performance timings that individual clients are experiencing, rather than wait to have somebody say, "Hey, your app is slow."
Yep. I mean, any application that you're deploying to any end user besides yourself really should have this configured.
Yeah.
It's almost so simple. There's no reason not to, and especially since it's free.
Sure.
So,
okay. So then forward looking. So that's what we can do right now. If somebody has an existing WinForms application, they just kind of want to bring it into the fold. But forward looking, what's consuming your brain? What you can't use it now, but it's going to happen at some point. What's the vision?
Yeah. So basically, the vision is just empowering all Windows application developers to seamlessly and easily incrementally modernize their existing applications. We've learned so much in the past. We know most desktop developers are not going to rewrite their application from scratch unless there was an extremely strong or valid business proposition.
It's too expensive.
There are still so many huge desktop applications under active development where modern capabilities and modern features have been asked for so long. And so I'm really excited to consistently bring tooling to make it so easy for developers to have a modern UI, a modern distribution system, accessing modern device APIs on Windows 10, all of these things. just without having to do a full application rewrite. And then if you think about kind of the future of the device landscape and the device form factor, looking kind of at that recently announced Surface Neo device, the dual screen Windows 10X device.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we're trying to do is make it so that if desktop developers are interested in taking advantage of those devices, they can incrementally over time make their applications more ready to run natively on those devices. And then they can get these awesome dual screen experiences that can kind of light up entirely new productivity experiences for kind of more mobile form factors.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So for listeners who love what we just talked about and really want to dig in and learn more, what resources would you point them to?
Yeah, so the resources that I would recommend would be the Visual Studio blog at devblogs.microsoft.com/Visual Studio, where we'll constantly announce new tooling improvements for XAML developers, for WinForms developers, for any Windows developer. The .NET blog at devblogs.microsoft.com/.net, spelled out DOTNET. And then depending on what you as a developer are interested in, a lot of what we're doing is open source. And so if you're more interested in kind of a more modern look and feel for your existing applications using XAML islands or using WinUI, the GitHub repository is available at a shortened URL, aka.ms/WinUI, WINUI. And then you can, if you're more interested in deployment or kind of modern distribution, you can take a look at aka.ms/MSIX. It'll take you directly to the MSIX documentation. And you can also find some of the links to the open source repositories related to MSIX directly from there as well.
Awesome. Wow. Well, we packed in a ton of information in this show. I really appreciate your time and you sharing it with us, Daniel.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting.
And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.